mana.
I'm relatively new to PoE and ARPGs as a whole. My goal of the game is just to create and showcase my own shit that I find fun to play. This is my first attempt. And right now in progression I've peaked at clearing a couple T10 maps, so the build is very much a work in progress. But I think I'll be able to take it through all the hardest content. I want to show off the concept now since the trial and error process is taking me forever. I'm sure I'm going to get some things wrong and there's plenty of room for improvement, so let me know if you've got suggestions. The goal of the build is just to clear with Lightning Warp and nuke bosses and high health enemies with Lightning Conduit. The pros: 1. A cool fast clear that electrocutes. 1. A big nuke that electrocutes. Cons: 1. Being a PS5 player. You can't finally select your warp location on controller, you just have to aim and hope Jesus takes you to a good spot. 1. A long setup time for Lightning Conduit, but it can be optimized with more cast speed and with proper boss precasting. 1. Playing close range and relying on EHP, curses, and CC feels kinda rough defensively right now, but I'm working to solve that, and I'm sure others are doing it just fine, so long term, this probably doesn't really apply. Let's go over the skills first. The first part of my epic combo is Ball Lightning. I throw it out, use Lightning Warp on it, and hope that plenty of monsters go into culling range so I can cast Ball Lightning as little as possible. For the supports, Scattershot and Unleash feel pretty necessary in order to have enough Lightning Warp targets at the beginning of a fight. Right now the third slot doesn't feel too important. What I settled on for now is Mobility for a small positioning advantage. I experimented with Acceleration previously for faster projectiles, and it felt really good in a lot of situations, but pretty bad in some others. So with Lightning Warp, while clearing, the goal is just to hold this ability for as long as you can, and just keep warping unless you're about to die and you need to reposition. I'll go through all my gear later, but it's important to mention I'm using Kitoko's current gloves, which cause a high damage Lightning Warp to electrocute very often without even slotting in electrocution supports. The gloves obviously make Lightning Conduit electrocute as well, so that's huge on bosses. Lightning Warp always creates shocked ground where it lands, so enemies standing there are always going to be shocked. I take the double shock node on the Stormweaver Ascendancy tree, so Overcharge is just here to scale that even further. Since they're always shocked, if you add lightning exposure, they're always going to be exposed as well. And then I have Strip Away just to increase the exposure scaling. I don't know if this is necessary, but this combination is what feels the best to me right now. Inspiration feels super necessary in the setup. With Archmage and increased levels to lightning spells, Lightning Warp just ends up costing way too much and I can't sustain it without a cost decrease. And while I'm talking about mana, with the setup that I'm recording with, I honestly think I went way too overboard with damage and I need to reel it back and put in some more mana. It's pretty fucked up right now. As you can see, Lightning Warp is the only ability that I have a 5-link in. It was the only one that felt super necessary. Lightning Conduit is doing hella damage anyways, and I'm poor as shit. The 5-link orbs never drop, so this is what I'm rocking with for now. Lightning Conduit is super cool in this build because your enemies are pretty much always double shocked if you're going to cast it, and when the shock gets consumed it gets put right back on anyways because they're standing on the shocked ground. Kitoko's giving this skill the ability to electrocute is huge as well. My Lightning Warp doesn't really electrocute bosses, but my first cast of a Conduit will, so I can get more Lightning Conduit casts right after the first one. Lightning Conduit supports, I'm not too certain on right now. I've tried to slot in cast speed, but it still is abysmally slow. Inevitable Critical feels kinda good, though I'm not building for any crit bonus, so I expect to change this around quite a bit, especially when I get a 5-link for this skill. Earlier on in mapping, I felt like I needed to use Lightning Conduit more often in my clear, so I wasn't using Concentrated Effect until I got to a boss. But with where my damage is at, I can usually clear most things with Lightning Warp, and when there are rares with a bunch of health that are electrocuted and I'm pretty safe to do so, I'll just cast Lightning Conduit. I don't really need the AoE. And then I just have Controlled Destruction on there for more damage. Now that I've gone over Conduit, I should mention Mana Tempest. The original idea was to cast Mana Tempest before my first Lightning Warp cast, because when you put quality on Mana Tempest, you can snapshot its effects for up to a second after leaving its area. But there's currently a bug that causes the game to crash when you do the Mana Tempest Lightning Warp combo, and it crashes very consistently, so I literally can't use this. Sometimes I accidentally will and I'll just crash. but I still get to use Mana Tempest before casting Lightning Conduit, and the cast speed for Tempest is actually pretty fast, so generally I'm able to do that. For supports, I'm using Unbreakable, which helps when you're casting Lightning Conduit to avoid stun, Lightning Mastery as sort of a placeholder, and Premeditation to increase the damage. I like using a Scepter because all the Spirit allows me to swap things around and solve problems sort of on the fly without respecking, so I just think it's a cool system and it's really fun. Discipline does nothing for me other than gives me a slot that I can put Clarity on, Archmage for sick damage obviously, and I have no more supports that I would slot into this, I'm already using them. Mana Remnants is something I might be able to drop for more Spirit in the future, but right now spamming Lightning Warp becomes much more doable when I'm automatically picking up mana along the way. I probably couldn't use Archmage in my setup without Mana Remnants. I've been using Blasphemy, sometimes 1 curse, sometimes 2, to solve for some defenses. Right now with Archmage taking so much Spirit, I just use 1 curse. Temp Chains with Heightened Curse and Magnified Effect feels pretty good. I've tried Enfeeble, that feels alright too. I'm not too sure which one's better. Maybe there's a way I can get enough Spirit to be double cursed up on a Thursday afternoon with both of them, so that's something I'll look into later. The side note is I did try to fit Blink into this build, but I just felt like I needed to roll out of Lightning Conduits too often because the cast speed is so shit, and I couldn't do that as often as I needed to with Blink. Alright, onto the passive tree. Ascendancy nodes, the double shocks is huge for reasons I've already mentioned. This is something that I'm probably going to tweak. The exposure nodes have a notable increase on my damage, but like I said, I'm having huge mana issues, so I might have to go back into fully onto the Arcane Surge side until I get my final Ascendancy points, and I'll put those into the exposure. Defensively, since I'm a low knowledge player that sucks at the game, I just went with the obvious Mom mana stacking for EHP Shell. When I started endgame, I took Eldritch Battery, but I kept fucking dying, I didn't know why, until I spec'd out of it. My next purchase is probably going to be the Everlasting Gaze Amulet, and then I can try taking EB again. So until then, I'm spec'd into both mana and energy shield nodes. I took CI because chaos damage was fucking me, and not having to solve for chaos res makes the game more fun. This right here is kind of a nasty, long attribute traveling journey. I'll probably try and clear it up later. I haven't gotten any great jewels yet, but the stats on them seem good, so having these slots seems pretty nice. Spell area feels very important for clearing with Lightning Warp, and it's kind of nice QOL on bosses too. I was dying a lot to random ranged mobs just hardscoping me from far away, so getting the extra area to electrocute or kill them is huge. I'm not sure about these cast speed nodes. I mostly took them to help with Conduit, but they're probably better spent in mana or ES for now. Lightning Conduit still feels slow as shit even with these. Casting Cascade is going to have a lot more value when the Mana Tempest and Lightning Warp combo stops crashing the game. And when I quit being lazy and I work on a weapon swap, I might take these nodes for Conduit and get some more ES and mana for Lightning Warp. As far as gear goes, plus to lightning levels on Wand felt absolutely huge. I went from +2 to +4 recently, and while it destroys my mana, the damage difference is just night and day. I can never go back. An instant recovery mana flask feels very important for survivability and just for general mana upkeep. Other mana flasks felt like they weren't really doing anything. I put on a thawing charm recently because I kept getting frozen in higher tier maps, but with the tier 6 and tier 11 resistance penalties getting removed, I may be able to swap this charm out for something else. A scepter with some increased spirit is definitely necessary for this build. Last thing to mention, other than Katoko's, which I already spoke about, is that I'm using a spirit amulet just to push me a little bit over the threshold, but the plan is once I get the Everlasting Gaze amulet, I'm going to put on a scepter with even more spirit. Let me know if you got any ideas for this build, or if I fucked anything up, and if you or someone you love are playing a similar build, let me know and I'll steal shit from you.